It's a pleasure to be here and have a big crowd like this. So what I'd like to tell you is what I think is the major factor accelerating our aging, and how relatively inexpensively we can prolong lifespan, a healthy lifespan. So this is your metabolism. So what do you need to run your metabolism? Well, you need oxygen, and you need some micronutrients. There are about 40 micronutrients, the essential amino acids, but I won't talk about those today. I'll just talk about the 15 or so minerals you need to run your metabolism: magnesium, calcium, zinc, iron. You can name a number of them. And then the 15 or so vitamins that you need for metabolism. And those are mostly coenzymes for enzymes that do work. So practically every pathway has a few of these vitamins, essential vitamins and minerals in it. So if you don't get any one of these 30 substances, you die. But what I'll tell you is, even when you're a little bit deficient, you pay a price for it. And I'll tell you what, I think the price is it ages you faster. And I'll tell you why I think that. So these are all the micronutrients we need. The vitamins, the minerals, 2 essential fatty acids, omega-3s and omega-6s. And it used to be we'd have 1-to-1 ratio, maybe 2-to-1. But now it's 17-to-1 because we're short of omega-3s. So we're really in bad shape about that. And the brain is mostly fat. We're all fatheads. And your fatty acids, 30% of them are DHA, which is a long chemical name I probably couldn't get out of me right now. But it's linolenic is the shortest omega-3, and that you can get from flaxseed and other things. So you can get a little bit from vegetable oils. But the one that's in our brain is in tuna and salmon, all these deep sea fish. On the other hand, you don't want to eat swordfish every night because you get mercury poisoning. But that's life is all trade-offs. People think there's life without trade-offs. But anyway, but in general, we should be eating more fish. And then these are the amino acids. And so I'll talk mainly about these. Are we getting enough? And the answer is a great big no. You've heard there's been recent popularity about some physicians who are saying, look, vitamins have been studied to death, they don't work, and enough is enough. And it's not true. They just don't understand nutrition, and their gold standard is the randomized double-blind clinical trial, and then they give it to people. Every one of them is deficient in some vitamin or other, but they're not measuring anything. So they don't know whatever intervention they're doing is doing it. So those type of trials are hugely expensive and designed to fail. And the good ones, which measure things, see things. So practically every micronutrient, they've done extensive studies, and we need the vitamins and minerals to run our metabolism. And I'll tell you more about them. But anyway, you can dismiss that. So the government sets up committees with 2 numbers, the EAR and the RDA. The RDA you've heard about. That's the recommended dietary allowance, how much the population should be getting. And the EAR, if you're below that, the committee says you're deficient or inadequate or whatever term you want to use. But, okay. And this is percent ingesting below the EAR from all sources, from food, from fortification and supplements. It isn't pretty. Magnesium, 45% of the US population. Now, why don't we do anything about that? I mean, it clearly isn't meeting, we're not meeting the standards. But the reason is we don't know what's happening. But I'm going to tell you what's happening. You're aging yourself faster. And I'll get into why I think that. And so how do I get my magnesium? Well, nature's even conveniently color-coded for you. Magnesium isn't green, but it's in the center of the chlorophyll molecule. So anytime you want eat chlorophyll, you're getting magnesium. Big plate of spinach, big plate of kale, you're getting your magnesium. It's easy. Anyway, calcium, you know, you get from dairy, 35%. Zinc, 8%. Well, only 8%. But zinc is in 2,000 enzymes in your body. It's the most used mineral or vitamin. 2,000 enzymes with zinc fingers that recognize pieces of DNA and all of that. You don't want to be low in zinc. But on the other hand, metals are tricky because they look a lot alike. So the calcium-magnesium ratio, the body cares about that. So you don't want to give a big load of calcium by taking calcium pills without taking magnesium along with it. And they sell 2 calciums to 1 magnesium pills. And that's what you should be, a calcium citrate with a little magnesium in it. That's what you should be taking. Anyway, so minerals are a little different. You can overdo it. Mae West said too much of a good thing is wonderful, but she was thinking about sex, not micronutrients. Zinc, vitamin D, 70%. I'm going to talk a little more about vitamin D. We're in the middle of writing a whole series of papers about vitamin D. Vitamin D, you don't get mostly from food, though you can take a supplement. You get it from sunshine. You guys are probably getting lots of vitamin D. But 70% of the US population, from all sources, is still deficient in vitamin D. And they fortified food, but they fortified the wrong food. I'll tell you later. And they didn't put enough in. Vitamin E, 60%, vitamin K, 35%, vitamin A, 34%, vitamin C, 25%. And omega-3, they haven't set one of these numbers, but it's very high because we're just not getting enough. It's not a pretty picture. So practically everybody is deficient in something. And then some people, like the obese, are deficient in everything. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay. Everybody recognize what these are. They're red blood cells. And red blood cells, as you probably know, don't have any DNA. So when the precursor cell to the red blood cell is made, the nucleus is extruded and thrown away. Okay. Some years ago, some clever guy said, let's stain red blood cells for DNA. And everybody else said, you're crazy, red blood cells don't have any DNA. But he went ahead and used a fluorescent reagent for DNA. And lo and behold, this was in mice, 1 in 2,000 cells lighted up. It had a piece of chromosome in it. And they tracked it down. It turns out when you extrude the nucleus from the precursor cell, if there's a chromosome break, a little piece of chromosome gets left behind when the nucleus is extruded. And it's a measure of chromosome breaks. Now, chromosome breaks are the most dangerous part of radiation. Radiation gives nicks, which is a single strand, and breaks, which are the double strand. So those are the most dangerous lesions from radiation. So chromosome breaks aren't so good for you. They lead to cancer. But anyway, so this was a very easy test for chromosome breaks. You just take mouse red blood cells, put it on a microscope slide, stain them with this fluorescent reagent, and 1 in 2,000 lights up. You irradiate them, you get more of them. Now, I was, a fellow came to my lab on sabbatical, Jim McGregor, and he did what I think was a gorgeous experiment, which I'll go into in a minute. And nobody paid any attention to it. But it made me go into nutrition with both feet. So McGregor was looking at mice, and he was measuring these, they're called micronuclei, little bits of chromosome. And he was irradiating them. They get a nice dose response. You get more of them. And he was looking at caffeine and other things that might influence DNA repair. But I won't discuss all that. But one day, he was doing an experiment, and all his control mice were full of chromosome breaks. He said, "What's going on?" He yelled at his technician, "Did you irradiate those mice by mistake?" He said, "Absolutely not." And McGregor, being a very good scientist, tracked it down, and he called up the company that made the vitamin mix. He checked lots of things, and they had left one of the vitamins out of the vitamin mix. And they said, "Oh, Dr. McGregor, we were going to tell you about all that." And so it was folic acid. So he decided, well, let's do a dose-response curve on folic acid. And the less folic acid you put in, the more chromosome breaks you get. Obviously, if the mice are getting none, they'll die, but this was small amounts. So that shook him up a bit, and he said, "I want to do this in humans." So he looked in humans, and humans, you don't see any micronuclei, even from irradiated people. Turns out inbred mice, which are these white mice we use, are all highly inbred, have lost splenic function. The spleen is down here somewhere, but the function of the spleen is all your blood goes through the spleen every day. And the spleen's function is to sieve out any blood cell that's a little stiff. The older ones are stiff. So this is a way of preventing your capillaries getting clogged up by some stiff blood cell. This capillary is just chock full of these things. So you need a supple red blood cell to get through. And anyway, so it doesn't work in humans. But McGregor, being a good scientist, didn't stop there. He went to our local health maintenance organization. It's called Kaiser. They have 6 million people in Northern California in their database. So he said, "Do you have any people without spleens?" And they said, "Oh, Dr. McGregor, we have plenty of them, hundreds of them. They've lost the spleen in an accident, and they live perfectly well." So he said, "Could I contact some of them and take a blood sample?" And they said, "Sure." So he went to Kaiser, and he got 20 people, and here's the baseline for micronuclei, for chromosome breaks in those 20 people. But there was one guy who is way up here. He said, "What's wrong with this guy? He's breaking his chromosomes all over the place." And so the reticulocytes are about 1% of the red blood cells. They're the newly synthesized ones. And then the 99% others are just plain red blood cells. So he measured the level of all these in this experiment. So anyway, he followed this guy for a year, and then he stumbled on this folic acid deficiency causes chromosome breaks in mice. He said, "I wonder if this guy's folic acid deficient." He asked him what he ate, and he ate a pretty lousy diet, but he was getting the same amount of folic acid as 10% of the US population and half the poor. But anyway, so he decided to do an experiment, and he gave him a form of folic acid. And you can see the reticulocytes, which turn over in a few days, just came right down to baseline. Beautiful. And you establish causality. Epidemiology you can do forever. You got an association. You don't establish causality. So one of the sciences that's really difficult to do is human epidemiology, because they establish an association, and they get the wrong answer half the time. We're mechanism people. We want to dig down and understand things. But I'm not saying epidemiologists aren't necessary, and there are really good ones out there, but there's a lot of noise in the system. My epidemiologist joke, study shows Miami is a weird place. Everybody's born Hispanic and dies Jewish. Anyway, so it's a muddy field, nutrition. So, and then the red blood cells, which turn over more slowly, came down, and they came down to baseline too. And then they ran out of this, he gave him folic acid for 10 days or something like that. And then they both started going up. Here's the retics and here's the red blood cells. And then he said, it's going to be unethical to break this guy's chromosomes. I need to get him on his way. So he said, hey, you're breaking your chromosomes. You should shape up and eat a better diet, more greens. Folia is the Latin word for leaf. Foliage is the same root. My mentor at Caltech, when I got my PhD in the early 50s, before all you guys were born, first isolated folic acid from 4 tons of spinach. In those days, you needed a lot to identify the thing. Anyway, so he said, eat some greens, or if you don't want to do that, I'll give you a pill. And the guy said, give me a pill. So he gave him a pill, and he went on. He followed him for a while, and then he moved out of town. And so you can see right down to baseline. This went down to baseline. That's a beauty. This was published in 1988. I thought it should have changed nutrition, and nobody paid any attention. Anyway, that got me started, so I'll pay homage. And also you can look at the level in the plasma and in the red blood cell. Red blood cells aren't just delivering oxygen to the tissue, they're the FedEx trucks of the body. They're delivering all kinds of nutrients, and they're filled with nutrients. So when they dump the oxygen and pick up the CO2, they're also dumping all these nutrients. So as I say, this level of folate that breaks your chromosomes, now it's only one guy, but still it's a pretty convincing experiment to me. And it's relatively cheap compared to all this epidemiology, but you have to know what you're doing. Anyway, half of the poor were at this level where they're breaking chromosomes. We freak out about a tiny dose of radiation, but we're eating horrible diets and doing the same thing. And 10% of the US population was at this level. Some years later, both Fennick in Australia and my lab compared radiation with folic acid in human cells. And here's X-rays. The more X-rays, the more chromosomes you break. And here's folic acid. The less folic acid, the more chromosomes you break. And this, we're cutting it in half. You're in the range. People aren't getting enough of this stuff. Your mom told you to eat greens. Yeah. So we helped McGregor work on the mechanism. I won't go into that. But there are 2 main pools of folate, methyl tetrahydrofolate and B12, which methylate homocysteine to methionine. And this is one of the standard amino acids in all protein. And then this is the main methylating agent in the cell, is methyl tetrahydrofolate. So this goes to that, and that generates one of these. So it's a cycle. So if you don't get enough folate or B12, turns out both of them, shortages break your chromosomes. And then you get homocysteine accumulates. And you can measure that easily. And they've associated homocysteine accumulation with cognitive decay and with brain shrinkage. So that's not so nice. And then this one, and heart disease, sorry. Methylene tetrahydrofolate methylates uracil to thymine. Thymine is in DNA, uracil's in RNA, and there's just a methyl group tag, but it doesn't interfere with base pairing. And so if you don't have enough of this pool goes up, this pool goes down, and you start putting uracil in your DNA. And that isn't so good, because repair enzymes are designed to take it out of DNA. This is not supposed to be in there. And you make all these nicks in DNA, single-strand breaks. And so I'll talk about that. Anyway, there's a polymorphism in the human gene that converts this to this. And a polymorphism means an alternate form of the gene. So 40% of Northern Europeans have this mutation, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, that increases this pool at the expense of this pool. Now this is 4 or 5 different studies have shown you get more cancer when you don't have enough folate. And this shows you do in your brain and get heart disease. But those all come late in life. You wouldn't think that would be strong in nature selecting something. You could easily believe that Northern Europe, the guys up in Sweden, weren't eating greens all year round and might have been short of folate. But why would nature select this polymorphism? And sperm. Nature really cares about your sperm. And so one of my students looked at sperm, and yes, sperm has more damage if people are low in folate. So anyway, we waved our arms. So the radiation biologists think these double-strand breaks are the most dangerous lesion. They're about, radiation causes oxidation to DNA, which makes 50 different kinds of lesions in the DNA. But if you have two nearby lesions, the trouble is repair enzymes come along and recognize that it's not normal and take it out. So, and you get this. But then this is holding it together and you sew it up. But if you have two nearby lesions, then you're in trouble because you might be repairing both strands and the chromosome falls apart. And you can repair that, but it's harder. So the general consensus among the radiation biologists are these double-strand breaks are the most dangerous thing. And so and just living, you're making oxidants from your mitochondria that are making your energy. And if you have 70,000 or so oxidants on one strand, and you get a few uracils on the other strand, and you get one near each other, then it's just like radiation. So living and not eating your greens is just like Fukushima. Except most people didn't die from radiation. They died from this huge wall of water coming in and crashing everything. Then the next vitamin I got interested in, or mineral, was Fernando Viteri, who is a Guatemalan originally, but professor of nutrition at Berkeley, knocked on my door one day and said, I'm an expert on iron. But you know, the World Health Organization, there are 2 billion women and children in the world who are not getting enough iron. They don't eat enough meat. And, but the World Health Organization goes around giving everybody iron, but they're giving them too much iron because too much iron is bad for you too. Why don't you do some experiments with me and we'll look at the whole range of iron? I said, sure. And one of my students and one of his students collaborated. So this is up is bad in this case. And what we're looking at is iron shortage tends to damage your mitochondria. And they're the power plants in the cell that are burning the fuel and releasing the energy and making ATP, which is a high energy form of, just a high chemical energy form that runs your muscles and your brain and all your uphill metabolism. Anyway, so these are all different things about mitochondria that go bad when you have too little iron, that's 2 billion women and children in the world, or too much iron, that's a lot of American men eating too much red meat. And, but this is the real problem. This is a relatively minor problem compared to that. But you get more mitochondrial DNA damage, you get more oxidants produced and mutagenic oxidants and less efficiency. So it's like a car engine in an old car. More black smoke and less efficiency. And this is a sweet spot. And now, many of the metals have a curve like this because zinc is in 2,000 enzymes and magnesium 500 enzymes. But calcium and magnesium are one above the other on the periodic table. They look a lot alike. They're both 2+ charges. And if you flood the body with calcium, you disable some magnesium enzymes and vice versa. And sodium and potassium are another pair like that. We're all getting too much sodium, but mostly because we're getting too little potassium. So anyway, there's several. So you don't want to go overboard on minerals, despite what Mae West said. So, and then the next one we worked on, a postdoc came to my lab, Emily Ho, and she was an expert on zinc, so she was growing human cells in culture and making them a little zinc deficient. And this is fluorescence. And I don't know whether many of you have heard of fluorescein, but it's a wildly fluorescent molecule. And so if you reduce fluorescein, it's non-fluorescent, but if you oxidize it back again, you get the fluorescent compound. And so people can put these on human cells and make them a little zinc deficient. You get oxidants being poured out of the cell. So zinc deficiency raises the level of oxidants, and most of these oxidants are mutagens. So this is a study showing the mutagens. I won't go into the details of this, but or the controls, but anyway. And then one of the other students was working on biotin, and he's just measuring this DCF fluorescence in cells. The cells fill up with oxidants if you make them a little biotin deficient. And we did that on a few other vitamins and minerals, and I said, what's going on? Why is nature, when you get deficient in a vitamin or mineral, why is nature causing DNA damage? And I was mulling over that, and one day I had an epiphany. I know why nature's doing this. It's trading off short-term survival for long-term health. So when you think about the minerals, the earth isn't uniform. There are red soils with a lot of iron and soils with very little iron. Selenium, which you need in your metabolism. There are patches in Europe where too much selenium and people get poisoned, and patches with too little selenium and people get poisoned. So you don't want to go overboard. You tell people selenium is good for them, and 5% are going to go out and poison themselves by taking too much. So you have to be, with the minerals, you have to be careful. Vitamins, you have big leeway. This is a mitochondria, and I'm not sure I'll go into too much, but this is a little organelle in every cell. There are about 500 of them per cell, and it's this organelle that makes energy. And it has an outer membrane, an inner membrane, and an inside of it. So this goes around. And basically, it's a rechargeable battery. What you're doing is in burning fuel, the Krebs cycle, and then these complexes, each of which have hundreds of proteins, are passing the electrons along. And every time you pump protons into the inner membrane space, and so that's putting a charge across the membrane, again, like a battery. And those going back in are making ATP, this high-energy phosphate form of ATP, which is the thing that drives your muscles and everything else. So these are the power plants. But if an electron gets loose, it reacts with oxygen, and you make mutagenic oxidants. So we're doing that all the time, and the older you get, the more you make. So when you get my age, you're spending all your time at doctors. But I turned 85 in December, and I decided my mitochondria are decaying ever more rapidly. But I finally figured out what they're decaying into. Hypochondria. Anyway, I think that's a major discovery. So magnesium deficiency, again, gives you mitochondrial DNA protein cross-links. Maybe it also does other things. But so whenever we turned around, we found this. So that prompted me to go to Google. And Google's wonderful. You couldn't have done this kind of science before Google. So anyway, I put in the 30 vitamins and minerals in Google, and across them, I put chromosome breaks, mutation, cancer, all those kinds of things, and out came all this stuff from the literature. You know, in the old days, you'd spend the rest of your life in the library trying to dig all this up. So calcium deficiency, Fenwick showed chromosome breaks, and Lipkin showed colon cancer. Folate deficiency, McGregor and Wee and Fenwick also showed chromosome breaks, and Willett showed cancer. And vitamin D deficiency, Hollick, who talked here, showed many types of cancer. Magnesium deficiency, chromosome breaks and cancer. Zinc deficiency, potassium deficiency, B12, selenium, omega-3, niacin, choline. Anyway, this was all in the literature. Epidemiology, because of this difficulties, you have to take it all with a grain of salt. It's like the Miami case. You can believe it, but you should be reasonably skeptical unless it's been done many times and there's some mechanism that sounds plausible. Though they figured out smoking when they didn't understand the mechanism. So it's okay if you have big risks, there's no problem. But these tiny risks, it's just impossible to figure it out. So I was thinking about this and published a paper back in 2006. God, it seems like just yesterday, but anyway. So what I postulated is that nature has a rationing. When you're running low on any vitamin or mineral, what nature has built in is the proteins that need that substance for the cell to survive, get it first, and for the organism to survive. And the ones that are preventing cancer, preventing heart disease, those are insidious damage that takes a long time. Those are the disease of aging. That's what you're trading off for it. So you're trading lifespan for survival. Now, you could say some of it might be reversible, and that's true, but DNA damage isn't reversible. Once you've made a mutation, you can't correct it anymore. Lesions you can correct, but not mutations. So anyway, we pay a price when we don't want to eat when we don't eat a good diet. So one day, Joyce McCann knocked on my door, and she used to be a postdoc with me maybe 40 years ago or 35 years ago. Anyway, she's a very smart older woman, and she was terrific when she was in the lab, and she came back to the Bay Area looking for a job. I said, Joyce, I'll hire you. Do what you want. She's just really smart in ways that I'm not. And so what she said is, I'm a little skeptical of your triage theory. I call this triage, this rationing kind of thing. I think there's a better way to tackle it. I said, Joyce, go to it. What do you want to do? And she said, well, let's take a few of these vitamins and minerals that have been well studied. Actually, most of them have been pretty well studied, but nobody looked at the big picture. And see if the essential proteins get fed first before the other ones. Which proteins are you disabling when you don't get enough? I said, that sounds like a good idea. And so she started with vitamin K, and it's gorgeous. She wrote a big review that was just beautiful because it has all these medical implications that nobody understood before. And it was based on this, and it's built into vitamin K. So vitamin K was discovered by a guy named Dam, D-A-M, in Denmark. And he showed that there was some factor in green leaves that was necessary for blood clotting. If you didn't get this, your blood didn't clot. And he won a Nobel Prize for all of that. And so Joyce looked at mouse knockouts. You can knock out any gene in a mouse. Kopecky got a Nobel Prize for figuring out this technology. You knock out a gene in a mouse, and then you see what happens. And it's been a very valuable technique, and they've knocked out a good percentage of the genes in mice now. Soon they'll have them all. Well, so Joyce went to the mouse knockouts that are vitamin K dependent. I should say first what vitamin K does. So vitamin K is used in photosynthesis in plants. It's called phytoquinone. And animals have hijacked that molecule for a different purpose. It's a cofactor for an enzyme that takes a glutamic acid in an already made protein, and glutamic acid has an acid group up at the top, and puts another acid group. So you have two acid groups sticking out, and they can bind calcium. They're all calcium binding protein. The blood clotting network is a network of calcium and protein. So anyway, you knock out any of these blood clotting genes, and it's embryonic lethal. You don't even get to finish the embryo. And there are 20,000 so miles of, or maybe it's kilometers, I don't remember, of capillaries in a mouse. And you're making a mouse, and any little imperfection, the mouse dies, okay? And you know you cut yourself once a week or once every couple of weeks, and if you didn't have blood clotting, you'd die. So we're not interested in those. Those are die. What we're interested in, the ones you're starving, the proteins you're starving. Osteocalcin's in the bone, and it moves calcium around in the bone. You knock it out in mice, the animals are born, they look perfectly okay, but as they get older, if you stress them a bit, the bones break. And vitamin K deficiency is associated with bone fractures. So that all fits. And Gas6 protein has to do with diabetes and acute coronary syndrome. Matrix LA protein is sort of interesting. I'll tell you about that. I won't go into too much detail. GLA is the name of this funny amino acid. So GLU is the 3-letter code for glutamic acid. And it's some sequence in the DNA where you have a glutamic acid. The protein puts a extra carboxyl group to make a GLA. So matrix GLA protein. And that, you knock that out in mice, the animals are born, they look perfectly okay, and then they all drop dead fairly early in their life, 3 months of age, which is, mice only live 2 years, so it's what does it do? What do they die of? Calcification of the arteries. Turns out that protein protects you against calcification of the arteries. And calcification of the arteries, the calcium phosphate crystals will crystallize out if you look at them. It's very easily made, it's called hydroxyapatite if you're interested, those crystals. And that's the nucleus of an atherosclerotic plaque. So, and this protein stops that. Now, somebody with lots of atherosclerotic plaques comes into the doctor, they give them all sorts of drugs and things, but the solution is vitamin K will prevent it all. So they ought to eat more greens. Again, it's color-coded because it's in photosynthesis in plants. Anything green has vitamin K. And then there's another, TGFBI is the mice are born, they look fine, then they all drop dead of cancer. And it turns out that's in the matrix of the cell, and it's interacting with the microtubules on the surface that separate the chromosomes at mitosis. Doesn't work quite as well. And you lose a chromosome here or there. The Japanese had looked at that. And when you lose a chromosome, you get cancer. So anyway, so there are all these interesting things coming out of this from a medical point of view and understanding mechanism. And does do the coagulation proteins get favored? Do they get it first? And the way the system works is any phylloquinone you eat goes right, it's lipophilic, and it goes right to the liver. And you only do the coagulation proteins in the liver. All the others are done in the peripheral tissues. And then the vitamin K is converted to something called MK, a menaquinone form of vitamin K. And that then goes to all the tissues equally. And so you do these other proteins. So you build in this triage kind of thing to favor the coagulation protein. These other proteins are more long-term, and it all fits with the human. There's a mutation in that gene in humans where people die of calcification of the arteries in an early age, and it's in the same gene. So it all kind of makes sense. And in Japan, people eat a lot of natto. Has anybody here eaten natto? Not many. My wife raised her hands. So this is natto. It's a Japanese health food. And what it is Bacillus subtilis fermented soybeans. And it's full of something called MK7, which goes to all the tissues, so it prevents your starving these proteins that are preventing insidious damage. But it looks a little yucky, it smells a little yucky, and it tastes a little yucky. So Westerners just don't like it. But it's It's like eating Limburger cheese for the first time. Nobody likes it, but then you get used to it. And so the Japanese, some Japanese eat natto and some don't. And the epidemiologists say that the people who eat it get less heart disease, they get fewer bone fractures. Anyway, it all kinds of fits. Now, selenium, I won't go into any detail, because otherwise I'd talk too long. But again, the things that happen to your cancer, DNA damage, heart disease, hypertension, reduced resistance to infection, you knock out your immune system, muscle weakness, and so all these long-term things. And but some of the proteins are favored, and the way that are more essential, and the way the system does it is in a completely different mechanism. So the selenium goes into a transfer RNA that then puts a selenocysteine into protein. So it's a different thing. There's a methyl group that determines all this, and it's affected by selenium deficiency. So you can activate one set of genes and not the other, and you activate the ones that are essential for survival. So here we have two different systems, and lots of the proteins are these more long-term proteins. I call them longevity proteins, as distinct from essential proteins. And half of the proteins we examined in these two vitamins and minerals were longevity proteins, which got me thinking we're devoting a lot of our proteins to keep having a long lifespan. Rats and mice live 2 or 3 years, and humans live 80 or more years if you behave yourself. And and then we started thinking about the immune system. So your immune system decays with age. So I plugged into Google what goes wrong with the immune system with age, and out came these 6 things. And then I plugged into Google the 30 vitamins and minerals, and out came studies, vitamin A, zinc, and folate. This folate really shook me up, because it was a paper from my own lab that we didn't understand. One of my French-Canadian postdocs, Chantal Courtemanche, had found that folate deficiency changes the CD4 to CD8 ratio in T cells. I didn't understand it. She didn't understand it. We published in Journal of Immunology, and I promptly forgot it completely. And then it showed up on my Google search. Anyway, and somebody had done vitamin A, zinc, tryptophan, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc. So relatively little activity in this field, but there's a fair amount out there. But nobody said, hey, you're knocking out your immune system when you don't eat a good diet. You're going to get more viruses and all that. Because nature is trading long-term health, you shorten your long-term health to favor short-term health. And long-term health is remembering that virus that hit you 5 years ago. Well, in a crunch, you get rid of it. So it's a way of saving micronutrients by trashing your immune system. There was a lot in the literature that poor countries get more diseases. The Westerners who are living there don't get all these diseases because they're eating a much better diet. But nobody knew why. So Joyce McCann, who I talked about a little while ago, who did those 2 terrific reviews, she then went on to looking at the developing fetus and wrote 4 big reviews. Iron, you give too little iron to mice or rats. The pups don't do well on IQ tests, on rat IQ tests and mouse IQ tests. And kids don't do well in school when they're low in iron. But vitamin D was a really interesting one, because vitamin D, all sorts of things happen when you don't get your vitamin D. And it turns out when they sequence the human genome, that sequence of 12 bases, the vitamin D receptor element, it's called, that the vitamin D receptor with vitamin D binds to turn on or turn off the gene, that was in 900 genes. Now that's an appreciable part of the genes in your body. There are only 20,000 genes altogether. So we're talking about some appreciable part of the genome is controlled by vitamin D. And everybody's deficient. Or not everybody, but most people. Anyway, and there was evidence that the fetus didn't develop well if you didn't have vitamin D. But the evidence in mice and rats was fairly convincing. In humans, people just hadn't done it. But if you're having a baby, the baby sucks it out of the brain of the mother. They've seen that with car accidents and analyzing babies and things like that. My daughter, who's smart as a whip, when she had her kid, she said she was going around like a space cadet for a while. I said, take some vitamin D pills. Yeah. And the brain is filled with vitamin D receptor, and the brain is filled with proteins that are turned on by vitamin D. And in fact, the most exciting papers to ever come out of my lab, I think, are just being written by a wonderful postdoc in my lab, Rhonda Patrick. So she came to my lab, and in July, I knew that autism was connected to vitamin D. That partly came out of the work we were reading on autism. So it's higher in northern latitudes. If you have a darker skin, you have trouble and other things. But if, with all these proteins, then I came across a paper that said that autistic cells from autistic kids didn't grow well on tryptophan. Now, tryptophan is an essential amino acid. It's in all protein, but it's converted to serotonin in the brain. And serotonin is the main behavioral hormone. You knock it out in mice, they don't interact with each other. And kids who have, and if you lower serotonin in the human brain, they can do that. People become aggressive and impulsive and all sorts of things. They don't interact with people. So I said, Rhonda, do you think there's some connection between vitamin D hormone and serotonin? And yes, there in the two genes that were making serotonin, one in the brain and one in the rest of the body, there was the signature of this protein. But people had published that along with the 900 other, but nobody paid attention to it. And then we just started discussing, could one be an on signal and one an off signal? And that was worked out in the literature for other genes. And yes, one was an on signal, that was the one in the brain. You're turning it on. And the one in the gut, which is much more powerful and making lots of serotonin in the gut, was an off signal. So vitamin D hormone turns off the one in the gut so more tryptophan can go to the brain and during the day when the sun is shining, and that makes the serotonin in the brain. So that explained all sorts of things that were known about serotonin, but nobody understood that mothers of autistic kids had high levels of serotonin in their blood, but there was low serotonin in the brain of the kid. And then the kid had higher levels of serotonin in the blood and low in the brain. But that's because one is turning on and one is turning off. And anyway, I won't go into all the details, but those first paper in a series is out on the web now. And you can, if you're interested in autism, you can fish it out. And it explains why boys get autism and girls don't, etc. Oh, one of these proteins here that's turned on or has the right sequence was oxytocin. And one of the things Rhonda found is that two other hormones that are involved with social interaction, oxytocin, which binds the mother to her baby, goes shooting up when the mother has a baby, and it binds her like glue to that baby. This motherly instinct is strong in animals, and it's due to oxytocin. You can spray oxytocin you can get it into the brain. It doesn't go through the blood-brain barrier. It's a peptide. But you can spray it in the brain of men, and they get much more trusting, like women. Anyway, so vitamin D hormone's turning all of these on. So, and the other thing is that melanin in the skin protects you against the burning rays of ultraviolet light in the tropics, in racially completely different people, Southern Indians, Africans, and New Guinea. So skin color has an important function depending on your latitude. So when it's in the tropics, it's too much UV ultraviolet light coming in, which will finally burn you, and then you get disabled and eaten by a lion or something and taken out of evolution. But if you're in Chicago, you're in trouble, because a dark skin, in northern climates, you need a whitest skin as possible to get every last bit of vitamin D. We get relatively vitamin D from food. The vitamin, in a way, it should have been called a hormone rather than a vitamin. But anyway, you can give it as a pill. It gets in perfectly well that way. So if you have a dark skin, you should be taking vitamin D, because 95% of African Americans are deficient in vitamin D. And 70% of the whole population were indoors playing video games or things, but it's a really important hormone. And anyway, enough said. So Fenwick looked at healthy non-smoking males and healthy non-smoking females, and look at this variability. He was looking at chromosome breaks, and goes up with age. You have that to look forward to. And women get less than men, but women live longer than men. So anyway, what's all that variability do? I suspect it's nutrition. We're really not eating a very good diet. So we're filling ourselves up with sugar, and a Coca-Cola is 40 grams of sugar. It's a disaster. And obese people have the worst diet because they're eating comfort food and they're starving for vitamins and minerals. Anyway, so what are the benefits of a triage analysis? I'm getting towards the end. How am I doing? Yeah. So provides a mechanism for how moderate vitamin mineral deficiency increasing risk of a disease of aging, and suggests a prevention strategy. So about half of proteins analyzed are longevity. So let's get to this. I'm friends with two scientists who are entrepreneurs, and one has a company that can take a finger prick of blood and measure 1,500 different proteins in a finger prick of blood. And there are only 3,500 proteins that are expressed in human blood. He's going to have them all in a few years. And that's a discovery system. He's in Boulder, Colorado, Larry Gold. And then I have another friend who's a scientist entrepreneur, and he uses monoclonal antibodies, which can recognize a specific protein. And he's taken 20 proteins which are of known medical importance and measured them all for $10. It's really on a finger prick of blood. And he talked the Chinese into subsidizing it, and he's putting one in every hospital in China. He's just about finished. He has 2,000 hospitals with these cheap machines in them. And the Chinese thought it was going to save them money. And he's a little afraid of tackling the FDA, but he'll do it in the States one way or another. He's a very enterprising guy, but he's about my age, so whether he'll live long enough, we'll see. Anyway, so what I'd like, and he has these machines that measure these 20 proteins, report to your iPhone or smartphone. You cut out expensive doctors, you cut out expensive phlebotomists. And I want to get nutrition in there. So if it says you're low in magnesium because this protein is low, what it's going to tell you is where you get your magnesium. It's in the center of the chlorophyll molecule. Eat something green, eat lots of it. You can get a little from nuts, or take a calcium magnesium pill. That's the future. And a decade, or at the most 2, we're all going to be doing that. It's giving a finger prick of blood. Even kids are willing to do that, or at least they'll have fun putting the finger in the machine, and then it'll be almost painless. Or maybe they can put a little Novocaine and then get. I don't know how they'll do it, but anyway, it's not a big deal, and it's cheap. So the other thing that shook me up, about half of proteins analyzed are longevity proteins. So what does that mean? All the vitamins and minerals that are essential, we've discovered because the animal dies. What happens if there's some vitamin out there that's only involved with longevity? See, vitamin K has both types, and so are all the other vitamins that are doing many genes, but they're frequent enough that I suspect there's a whole new class of vitamins we haven't discovered that's only to do with longevity. And we think we might have discovered one. And then there's an ophthalmologist here. So what about the eye? Well, many people have discovered that there are two carotenoids. Beta-carotene is a carotenoid. The function of carotenoids in plants, when plants turn orange in the fall, not around here, but up north, that's beta-carotene showing up and other carotenoids. And they have many conjugated double bonds, that's why they're orange. And when you have light and oxygen, the oxygen gets up to a higher energetic form of oxygen called singlet oxygen. It's a very powerful oxygen. It can blast anything. And beta-carotene will dissipate all that extra energy of the oxygen, bring it down to normal oxygen, and it goes off as heat. So that's its function in plants, and every plant has to have it because they're out in the light all the time. Well, we're making a little singlet oxygen in people in the dark. I won't go into the details. And I suspect the eye, which is seeing all this light, the blue light is the most toxic. Two carotenoids, lutein and zeaxanthine, are in the macula of the eye. So nature has transport systems and everything. It takes that from our food and puts it in the macula of the eye. That's a vitamin, but it's a longevity vitamin. Nobody's thinking it, nobody wants to call it a vitamin because the animals don't die if you don't have it there. They just go blind. But anyway, so, and that's just one of, I'm writing a review now that discusses half a dozen of these things that are potential vitamins that we're not calling vitamins. And we found one called ergothine, but I won't go into that. Anyway. So this was the cover of The Economist. The conventional wisdom is a third of our country is obese. And it's a disaster for health. Every possible disease of aging is accelerated in the obese. More Alzheimer's, more cognitive decay, more heart disease, more cancer, more immune dysfunction. You name it, if it's been studied, it's higher in the obese. They're starving, and I'll tell you why. So anyway, so the conventional wisdom is calories in and exercise out. Okay. So this is the American diet. It's the 10 leading sources of calories. Some government study did this. And number one source of calories in the United States is sugary soft drinks. 40 grams of sugar and no nutritive value. It's a disaster. It punches holes in your gut and it makes you fat because bacteria getting through, you get all inflamed and that's driving. Anyway, pizza, beer. There's nothing green on here. And so you can do without cake, donuts, and pastry, sorry, and do without sugary soft drinks and eat a little more fish. It's what your mom told you. More fruits and vegetables and less processed food, and you'll live like the Italians do or whatever. So being fat is really bad for you. Cigarette smoking is about 8 or 10 years off your life, 10 minutes per cigarette off your life. And obesity is going to be even worse, I think. And cancer, heart disease, cognitive function, diabetes, etc. So anyway, this I stole from some British website and modified it a bit.
That's a good line.
So about 10 years ago, Mark Shiganaga, who's a guy in our group who's the expert on the gut, and I said, hey, we have to get vitamins into the poor. They're eating the worst diet. And you give them pills, and they don't take it. The poor are known not to take their medicines regularly. So what do? So we decided, and to remember to take all these different kinds of pills. So see, a multivitamin mineral isn't enough. It doesn't have enough magnesium and calcium, it'd make the pill too big. It doesn't have enough potassium, make the pill too big. It doesn't have fish oil, which you need, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good first start, but it's not enough. So we decided to make a little bar. I work at Children's Hospital Oakland Research Institute, so we called it the Corey Bar. And the local USDA lab had a food science lab, and they were making a fruit-based bar from excess California fruit, and we said, could you put some soluble fiber in there? They said, sure. Could you put some insoluble fiber? Sure. Could you put all these vitamins? Sure. Could you put fish oil? Well, and anyway, we finally talked them into, and so we've been working together for 10 years. They doing the manufacturing, and we are telling them what to do. And we've done 18 clinical trials in people. But these aren't FDA-type clinical trials. We don't have the money for that. It's all done on a shoestring. So this shows one of them. Now, you all know that HDL, increasing your HDL is a good thing. That's the good cholesterol. But what these arrow plots are is the bottom of the arrow is where people were before we gave them the bar. And we have them eat 2 bars because there's so much fiber in there, which is good for your gut. But if you eat 2 bars all at once, you can get some stomach pains. So we say 2 bars. Eat your regular diet, don't change anything drastically, and eat 2 bars a day on top. Okay. From here to here, here to here. So even Michelle, who is running she's a pediatric cardiologist who is running our clinical trials for us. She's amazing. She runs marathons, and she's just a very fit middle-aged lady. And even her HDL, which was astronomical as it was, went higher. So it means these are ordinary people, no special things, who think they're eating good diets. But even ordinary people aren't eating quite good enough diet because we can raise everybody's HDL. Anyway, we're getting at the mechanism. Now, the nice thing about this is we think of it as the Mediterranean diet in the bar. We've put everything we know about nutrition into this bar. And now we can, 2 weeks, we see this change. So we can say, what is doing it? Well, so far, it's at least 3 things, and it may even be more. So we can take one ingredient out, and does that prevent it? And 2 ingredients. So anyway, we're tracking it down. But it's all kind of money limited because nobody will fund us for doing something like that. Anyway, we'll see. We're trying to get a company interested. So to finish off, just a word about life expectancy. Every year, life expectancy gets longer. We're doing something right. And I think part of that is we're eating overall better diets. It's still not where it should be, but the diet today is much better than in previous days. And we're getting some exercise. Anyway, this is women, this is men. And people are saying, oh, the US is in bad shape because Europe lives a little longer. But if you correct for auto accidents and you correct for murders in inner cities, we're doing better than Europe. So it was a false thing. Anyway, it keeps on going up, and now we're close to 80. And so eat a good diet and do a little exercise. That's good for you too, and you'll live longer. So this says you're 57 years old. I'd like to get that down a bit. And these are the people in the group. Jung is Korean background but was brought up in Thailand. He's discovered a new vitamin. He's a terrific guy. Joyce McCann wrote all these wonderful reviews. Swapna's an Indian postdoc who's been working on immunology. David works on all the minerals at once. Harold's a physician who keeps premature babies alive and spends an occasional time when he can get it in our lab. Sandy is an independent scientist working on DNA in mitochondria and looking at mutation, and we've been collaborating with her. Mark is our guru. He's a Japanese American who looks a little like Buddha, and he's making these wonderful mitochondrial concoctions that improve mitochondrial function, and he tries them all on himself because he eats too much white rice. He said it's a cultural thing, and he's a little fat, and his HDL is really low. Anyway, so I told Mark, after one of those concoctions, if you look like Cary Grant, we'll know that it worked. So here, Michelle, who is leading a lot of our clinical trials, pediatric cardiologist, and Ash Lau, who's a pediatric hematologist. He's running a lot of our clinical trials now. Thank you. The first hand up.
What is your recommended daily intake of vitamin D?
So since our paper just came out on the web, we've been getting hundreds of letters, and we can't possibly answer them all. So Rhonda's husband's computer whiz, so he can do an interactive website, which we're going to do as soon as we have the time, to put all of that, how much. Now, the best one out now is the Linus Pauling Institute website, LPI. Look up LPI, Linus Pauling Institute, and the director of that was a former postdoc of mine, a Swiss guy. He's wonderful. And he has every vitamin discussed, how much is enough, how much is too much, and it's very reliable. He's a really good scientist. So vitamin D, I take a 5,000 international unit pill a day, but I'm in the lab all the time, so I don't have a lot of time to get sunshine, and I can't get too much sunshine for other reasons. So, but 4,000 was set by the committees as the upper limit. I think that too low a number, and the amount they say the RDA, I think is too low. So I would take the upper limit, 4,000, and get your number up. What you want to be is between 40 and 50 nanograms per milliliter, and then you'll be fine. If you're below 30, you're in trouble, and you should take pills till you get it up there. So it's not going to cost much. It's simple. The other thing that we're low on is fish oil, and I take a couple of fish oils. Even I'm an Italian wife, so I eat a wonderful Mediterranean diet. We eat a lot of fish, but you can, again, analyze that and see how much you have and raise it up to the right level. But a couple of fish oil pills won't hurt. No. There.
Dr. Ames, thank you for spending the lecture, and welcome to Florida. You mentioned the detrimental effects of vitamin B deficits and magnesium deficits, and in America we have this incredible hyperglycemia and diabetic onslaught, which in the Krebs cycle just sucks out the B vitamins and magnesium. Will anybody in authority get excited about controlling the incredible sugar onslaught, except Mayor Bloomberg? Will somebody come along and try to do something?
Yeah, but, okay, so what do we do about all these sugary soft drinks? Banning things doesn't work. We had prohibition, and now we have the drug thing. So banning things just doesn't work. It establishes crime and all. You have to educate people, and that's hard, but we need to try. Sugary soft drinks, don't have your kids drink that stuff. My wife never had a sugary soft drink in the house. If they drink it as some friend once in a while, okay, but it isn't something. We drink water in this house, and or whatever. I don't know whether banning big bottles is going to work either. It makes them feel good, but I don't think it's effective. So how you do it is, the final thing that's going to do it is when we can get a finger prick of blood and say, you're low in this and low in that, and cut out the sugary soft drinks because it fills you up and you don't get your vitamins.
One more question.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that if we don't die of anything else, we're going to die of Alzheimer's. That really is, when they talk dementia and everything, that's where we're going. That's our final disease we're fighting. And recently they came out and said, go to a vegan diet, and then you won't have those minerals in your brain, which I've been very suspicious of. I'm not rushing to it. I moderate my, non-vegan intake. But your speech tonight kind of convinced me about the fish thing. And the other thing came out, a recent test that said they think women live longer because they have a menstrual cycle which takes iron out of their body, that we are suffering from excess iron. So I want you to address those particular problems with the minerals in the brain.
Now, people are studying Alzheimer's. A former postdoc of mine made a really important discovery, and I think there's a lot of science is slowly illuminating all this stuff. It's complicated. A body is fiendishly complicated, and it takes a long time, but science is finally going to sort it out, though there's no money for science now, so it's a bit of a disaster around the country. But and I think try and eat a good nutrition. That's going to turn out to be important. I don't know exactly how, but it's going to be important. Because it is, for all these degenerative diseases, that's part of the triage trade-off. And something is going to be preventing Alzheimer's that we're not getting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.